There's just so many unknowns, right? At the moment, he's got a little bit indications of an early poll bounce, but how big is that going to be? Will it sustain? He's got to get through the budget and really get the government's finances up and running before we can assess really how this government's going to fare. So I think it would be crazy to have a general election discussion now. And I think he knows that if he doesn't squash it now, it is going to run and run and run.
New Prime Minister Andy Burnham says he will not be calling an early election, which I know will make many of you very cross at home. Here he is speaking to Laura Koonsberg in an interview that will air on BBC One Panorama tomorrow night.
There's no early general election. And the thing I would say to you is, how many million people you just mentioned voted for a manifesto? We're in a parliamentary democracy, so I will honour that manifesto. And, obviously I have faced the public in Makerfield, and I went out onto those doorsteps. So, I have done that. I've got the support of colleagues in Parliament, and it's a parliamentary democracy that we're in.
Rule it out?
Well, I'm going to rule it out. Yeah, there's no early general election. I don't think people want it.
Well, there we go. He also said he would be prepared to call out Donald Trump to defend Britain's national interest before anything else if it is the right thing to do. Well, let's now catch up with Josh Glancy. Josh is Associate Editor of the Sunday Times. Good afternoon, Josh.
Good afternoon.
So do you think that's a smart move from Burnham, just to sort of squash that straight away?
Do you think that he 100% unequivocally squashed it there? I thought he got about 95% of the way there. But it was a strange use of a sort of what I would call a third-person passive, maybe. There is no early general election, rather than I am not going to call a early general election. I don't know. I think there was just the tiniest bit of rhetorical wiggle room.
I thought when she came back and said, "Are you ruling it out?" and he went, "Yes, I am," I thought that would pass the bar. But, listen, you are talking about somebody who said he didn't really, wasn't going to come for the top job. So there we go.
Yeah, I mean, look, he obviously isn't leaning that way at the moment, and I don't expect that we would see any movement on that for a year, because there's just so many unknowns, right? At the moment, he's got a little bit indications of an early poll bounce, but how big is that going to be? Will it sustain? He's got to get through the budget and really get the government's finances up and running before we can assess really how this government's going to fare. So I think it would be crazy to have a general election discussion now. And I think he knows that if he doesn't squash it now, it is going to run and run and run, and it'll become this endless talking point for the next 6 months.
Well, I remember when I first became a special advisor, which was very shortly after Gordon Brown became Prime Minister, and immediately we were plunged into the speculation about whether Gordon Brown was going to have an election, and it was disastrous. It was a very, very, very bad way for Gordon Brown.
Yeah, and Andy Burnham will remember that well too.
Yes, we all remember the pain of that. OK, so no early election. I also think he will want some time to sort of bed things down. And look, in terms of how he handles Trump, how can you see that relationship going, Josh?
Well, I think with Burnham and Trump, in a way, he's quite lucky that his predecessor, Keir Starmer, did quite a lot of the hard yards with Trump. When Trump first came into office, and really anything seemed possible, and we were all aghast at some of the things he was saying and doing. And there was the Greenland issue, there was, is America going to pull out of NATO? And most importantly, are they going to pull the plug on Ukraine? And, Starmer dealt with a lot of that. He did a lot of sucking up to Trump. It did him some damage domestically. People may quibble over whether he got his approach exactly right, but I think he sort of weathered that storm early on, and then they had their little contretemps over Iran and the beginning of the Iran war. So I think Burnham, in a way, is now in an easier place because he can afford to be what I would say is a bit more European towards Starmer. So if you look at Macron or Meloni, you can have a slightly fractious relationship at times, but you're fundamentally on the same page and there's a good dialogue there. But I think he's very conscious that the progressive voters they want to bring back into Labour will not like the imagery of him sucking up to Trump the way Starmer did early on. So I think he's going to play that a slightly more European approach, and it could work.
I think you're right. And I think actually Meloni has probably been very helpful in terms of, she's been pretty punchy in terms of taking on Trump, and that seems to have done quite well for her. It's quite fashionable now, isn't it, to sort of take on Trump, whereas at the beginning it was like who could sort of bend the knee quickest in terms of Trump. Well, look, lots of chat about Andy Burnham's debut week and particularly his use of social media. And that's something you've been focusing. What do you make of it? Because, my goodness, what a contrast from his predecessor. You know, it could not be more different.
Yeah, the contrast is huge. I mean, he is a natural communicator and it works on social media. He's got that cheeky chappy routine. And it's been quite an impressive blizzard because the policy announcements this week have been relatively low key, cost of living help. I mean, Starmer was doing something similar, but the tone is much more upbeat and optimistic and much less grim. There's the politics of trying and of can do, but also he just has the knack for it, and he's got a good team around him helping him, and he's been doing stuff with influencers. He's been jogging with Mo Farah. He did his bus fare cap with Bus Auntie. He's been splitting the G on his pint of Guinness. All these kind of familiar memes and tropes that he's been playing around with, and he's got really good engagement. You know, millions and millions of shares. He's actually getting organic cut through, as they say in the industry. So I think it is working for him. Obviously, there's a question of like, well, how important is that? And I think it is important. I think it is kind of the sine qua non, if you like, of modern politics, is that you need to be able to speak to people where they are, and most people spend most of their time on their phones. So you need to be able to pop up on social. You need to have that cut through. And if you look at other successful politicians at the moment, whether it's Zoran Mamdani in New York, Donald Trump, Nigel Farage, even Kemi Badenoch in the last year, they're people who can generate organic content. I know it sounds frivolous and banal, but it is important. It
is. I think you
it
are.
Doesn't get you the whole way, but it's got to be where you start.
I'll tell you what's so interesting, and I suppose slightly depressing, but that's just because I'm sort of like prehistoric in terms of my views on this stuff. You're absolutely right. It is really, really important, but it is so interesting how quickly politics has changed, because up until quite recently, the kind of orthodoxy was social media isn't real life, and don't think that, you know, when Jeremy Corbyn was probably the first politician that started to do well on social media. His team, whatever you think of Jeremy Corbyn, they understood the value of the clips. So whenever he did Prime Minister's questions, even though he wasn't very good at Prime Minister's questions, they clipped it up in a way that he was this award-winning debater, and you know, he got a big following, and now, you know, you've seen others go on since then. But at the time, people like me and others were like, well, you know, Twitter isn't real life and Instagram isn't real life and likes aren't votes. Is that changing now, Josh?
Well, you know, the average person spends, 2-3 hours on their phone a day. I mean, I do think that real life and online life have merged and blended significantly. But I do write today, and I do think this is important, that we are living in what the political theorist Anton Jaeger calls the age of hyperpolitics, where there's a lot of noise and buzz around politics, but it's actually not that much actually changes. You know, and the hard, long, slow policy slog of changing the country through government, it often doesn't seem to really happen, despite all the noise about politics. I think the real challenge for Burnham is he's shown he can play the attention economy. You know, he's mastered it and he's playing it like a lute. But the big question is, can he also do the substantial work? Can he do the hard, long, slow, boring policy grind, and can he kind of really get his ducks in a row in the way that Starmer struggled? I mean, Starmer struggled on the substance and the style at times. And I think that, though, you know, he's made some very grand promises this week, Andy Burnham. He's promised to end rough sleeping, re-industrialise Britain, fix social care, sort out defence spending, and on and on. Can he actually deliver on that? Can he do radical devolution as well?
But I suppose
it's going to be quite hard, and I think that social media only gets you so far.
Yeah, and can you keep up the sort of Tiggerish, insurgent, brilliant social media game when, let's say, you've got to be doing some really unpopular things, and let's say things start getting very hairy on defence and things like that? Can you still keep up that kind of social media persona?
Yeah, and you know, people have enjoyed the bouncy optimism of this week, but it might, say things really go south in the Strait of Hormuz in Iran over the next few weeks. Will that start to strike a slightly odd tone from the Prime Minister? As I spoke to one Tory advisor this week who has the scars on their back from working with various Tory Prime Ministers, and they said, look, when you're giving out money, it's very easy to have good comms, you know, and people can enjoy that. But when you start making controversial decisions, say putting up taxes then suddenly your digital strategy is rubbish and no one likes you. So, the hard yards remain unrun for
They
Burnham.
do. Now, I have to take a message from Jeff. Jeff thinks we are... Actually, I think Jeff is probably agreeing with you more, Josh. He says both of you and Josh seem to have missed the obvious Burnham get out. What does he mean by early in terms of general election? Is next spring early? A year from now? Plenty of wriggle room left in number 10 North. So Jeff is sceptical. Jeff probably is a bit more on your side of things, where you thought there was slight ambiguity there.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty slight, right? It would be a reversal, clearly, were he to go for an early general election. But, prime ministers change their minds. Like, that does happen. He would find the words, I think. I think there's just enough of a wiggle there that he could find the words to say, look, the circumstances have changed. I want to do this. And I do want to change. I want a mandate from the people, and it's quite hard to argue with that. Were he to say that, say this time next year.
Sam from Brecon has messaged in saying, should Burnham call a general election now? Come on, Ayesha and wishful thinking listeners. There's absolutely no way Burnham could call a general election in the near future. No clear thinking Prime Minister would call an election in the face of the existing polls. The Prime Minister's first priority is to improve the country through their policies. To do that, they have to stay in power. It would be a ridiculous move to call an election if there's a chance of losing power. It would be a suicidal move. It is not on the cards. Wake up to the reality and move on. OK, well, that is us telt from Sam from Brecon. Josh, great to catch up with you. Thank you as ever for your time this Sunday afternoon. That's Josh Glancy. And do read his column in the Times. It's a really, really interesting piece. And it's very fair, I think. It's a very fair piece because it does go through how good and punchy and energetic Andy Burnham's social media game has been, but also sets out some of the challenges that lie ahead.